Hare Krishna, good morning everyone and welcome to ISKCON of Silicon Valley. We're extremely excited today to introduce a devotee who has been serving ISKCON since the late 70s and who has had a major impact on the entire society because of his sincerity and expertise. He and his wife live now in Washington, D.C. and run the Potomac Temple. Before that, they ran the Gurukul in Vrindavan. And Vraja Vihari Prabhu, who's our guest speaker today, is known all over the world for his expertise in mentoring and mediation. He is the founder of the ISKCON Resolve, and also one of its one of the main members of ISKCON Resolve that is tasked with resolving various issues that come up, and things do come up all over the world. And in his professional job, he travels all over the world and mediates for big corporations and for government agencies to help them solve problems. Everyone who knows Vraja Vihari is always impressed by his humble and modest nature, coupled with his expertise in all things devotional. He also teaches Bhakti Shastric and is a calming force within ISKCON. He often facilitates GBC meetings because of his expertise in doing meetings and helping people acquire knowledge and move ahead in their lives. So dedicated to bringing the best of all that is available around the world in ISKCON. We've been trying for some time to bring Vraja Vihari Prabhu here, and we thank everyone for coming here to join, and those of you who have joined us online. And let's please give Vraja Vihari Prabhu a warm ISV welcome.
Okay. Hare Krishna, thank you, Vaisheshika Prabhu. Let's see if you're still clapping at the end. So, we'll start with just a little word association. So, when you hear the word conflict, what comes to your mind? And we'll go asking everyone, so we'll start with you. I don't know if I'll just repeat it quickly because we'll do this. Okay. Start. Yeah, go ahead.
So I think conflict means a problem or a situation that comes up.
Okay, next.
Feeling of hostility between two people.
Austerity?
Hostility.
Okay.
Difference of opinion.
Difference of opinion.
Yeah, disagreement, basically.
Disagreement.
Misunderstanding.
Misunderstanding, Okay. You choose a really long word. Yeah. Who's next? Anything comes to your mind?
Opposing ideas.
Opposing ideas. Okay, next.
It's written here, can't live with them and can't live without them.
Okay, next. Cheater. Yeah, next. A word that comes to mind when you hear the word conflict?
Yeah, I already have a couple of them.
Okay, next.
Mismatch of expectation and interests.
Ah, you've been reading books on conflict resolution. I'll just put, okay, expectate, yes?
People have two different opinions.
Different opinions. Do we have that here? Yep. Okay, good.
Or
That's all right.
fight.
Doesn't have to be original.
Negotiations.
Negotiations. Okay.
Cultural clash.
What's that?
Cultural clash also.
Control?
Cultural.
Cultural clash. Never happens in ISKCON. How do you spell it? Did we get... Nirakula Mataji, did we get the ones with the spell checks? What? The spell checks. Oh, okay. All right.
Control.
Control. Ishwaraham aham bhogi. Okay.
I had the same thing. Difference in expectations.
Different expectations, okay.
Anger and fighting spirit.
Anger and fighting spirit, okay.
A mismatch.
Mismatch. You're not talking, anyway, I won't say that joke. Next. In the back. Is there a microphone for the boys in the back? Yeah.
I was going to say anger.
Okay. Anyone else?
Ideological difference also.
Ideological difference?
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Did we miss anyone?
Lack of tolerance.
Lack of tolerance. All right.
Misunderstood.
What's that? Misunderstood. Okay. Okay, yes.
We are all personal, and we have our we are all personal. That Prabhupada mentioned that we are all having personal,
So
not
is that we're persons?
Yeah, we are all personal. We are not impersonal that, and also fun. Otherwise,
You're referring to that letter to a Trey Rishi?
yes, yeah, and then also fun, conflict. Otherwise, this life is just simple.
Life would be boring, yeah. If you look at this list, and I know I just wrote it with my scribble, but there's nothing very positive there, is there? Difference of opinion, disagreement, cultural difference, negotiations, control, mismatch, ideological differences, lack of tolerance, misunderstanding, different expectations, opposing ideas. So we'll see if by tomorrow afternoon, if we have maybe a different take on this, because really, conflict doesn't have to be a bad thing. As a matter of fact, if there isn't any conflict in an organization, basically that just means nobody cares anymore and the place is dead. Right? Yes?
Want to know the word? The word origin, the Latin.
I'm sure Google knows it, so please tell us.
Okay. Con, it's from the Latin word con, together, and figere, to strike.
There you go. Interesting. Okay. Together strike. Well, we're not necessarily suggesting that everyone goes on strike here. But the simple idea that it like so many things in this world, right? Like the mind. Krishna says, Udra Ratmanatmanam, Natmanam Avasadyat, right? Atmaiva Hyatmano Bandur, Atmaiva Viparatmana. It can be your friend or your enemy. So similarly, conflict and so many things is usually seen as you guys put here, so many kind of negative things, but it can also, when dealt with properly, can turn things around actually. And sometimes better relationships are on the far end of conflict. Okay? So I thought what to do. I gave Vaisheshika Prabhu and Nirakula Mataji a list of so many presentations I could make, and it was quite a list. and we certainly won't be able to cover them all in this trip, but what I thought was to take some of the key points. Is this a screw to something important? Key points, and drill down deeply on them and really get some, clear understanding, and also so that we may even use that language more in our dealings. So I thought the first thing I would discuss is about assumptions. Okay? And what I'd like to do also, now this seating arrangement is very classroom-ish, but we're going to be doing sometimes talking in groups of 3 and 4, so you'll have to turn around and things like that, okay? So in groups, it doesn't matter, groups of 3 to 5, it doesn't have to be an exact number, but, oops, that's upwards, that's downwards. Think of, in a small group, list as many false assumptions made, true or false. Oh yeah. So think of different assumptions that we've read about in the Shastra, where people have made an assumption about a situation. You understand? Let me give the idea of an assumption. So I work for the Department of the Interior for the federal government, and I often visit Native American reservations. That's a lot of my work. So I was visiting. Anyone here ever been to Anadarko, Oklahoma? 50% of your life is wasted. So I was going to Anadarko, and I rented a car in Oklahoma City. And it was late at night, and the Enterprise rental place only had one car left, and it was a red Mustang convertible. So it was like, oh shucks, because usually we're only allowed to rent economy cars, like Ford Focus or something like that. Really bad cars. So I said, okay, great, I'll take it. So I drove into Anadarko. Anadarko is a Native American reservation, and it's not a very well-to-do area. It's quite, as in many Native American reservations. So I was going to an office, if you could just imagine this, a strip mall with all the stores closed, except in the corner, one office, and a huge parking lot with weeds coming out of the asphalt, So the point is, you could see the Mustang a mile away. Right? So I'm driving in, and I'm going to do a presentation, do a training, and all the people, I guess they obviously noticed me coming, and when it was time to do the training, they all just sat crossed-armed, and basically were engaged in Gandhian non-cooperation, right? And none of the jokes worked, nothing worked, right? So finally I called for a break, and I asked the person in charge of the office, what's going on, And they said, well, we saw, we know that you're only allowed to rent economy cars, and we said, who's this? Why should we talk to this hotshot guy from D.C.? He's not a Native American. And he's obviously breaking the rules, thinks he can do whatever the hell he wants, and we're not going to have anything to do with him. So, did they make any assumptions? Based on what? Car. Right. So we'll talk a little bit more we'll analyze that in a few minutes. But for now, what I'd like you to do, get into groups quickly, and make a list, a short list, 2, 3, 4, whatever you can come up with. What are times in the Shastra where there are assumptions that are made? I know it's a bit of a tough question, but I know I was told that this is the smartest congregation in all of North America. One more minute. One more minute. So is this, tell me, ask her if this is okay if I'm like this. What's that? No, I'm talking about my walking. Is this walking? Ask her. Okay. Like this? It's okay? Okay, your time is up. Let's have whoever has a microphone give us a quick list. Go ahead.
One was Parvati and Chitraketu Maharaj incidents when Chitraketu Maharaj thought. Another one is doorkeeper of 4 Kumaras. They think that in the Vaikuntha when the 4 Kumaras trying to enter, they assume that they are just normal children.
4 Kumaras and doorkeeper, okay.
Brahma and Indra thought that Krishna is just assumed that they is small children. And Vrindavan playing and not.
Brahma and?
Indra both.
Okay, both.
And then one instance from Bhima when he thought that Hanuman and then is the tail is the, he can lift the tail easily, he assumed. And Aswathama. Aswathama.
Amazing, huh? So many things in the Shastra. Vaishesha, do you want to go next?
Duryodhana assumed that he would get the best deal by sitting by Krishna's head when he woke up. Ramachandra Puri assumed that Chaitanya Mahaprabhu was eating sweets because he saw ants. Daksha considered that Lord Shiva was low class because he didn't wear clothes and smeared his body with ashes.
Great. Wonderful. Also from your group? Okay.
Ramanuja? Yeah.
All right, let's hear it for that group.
Hi. No, there was another one. Ramanuja Acharya. Okay, in one pastime, Ramanuja Acharya had disciples that assumed that the householder was less Krishna conscious. So he arranged a robbery. He sent a brahmachari to rob the householder couple while the other brahmacharis were spying. And to see the reaction of the householder couple, when the brahmachari went in to rob in the night, and the woman that was sleeping saw them robbing and knew they were brahmacharis, she said to her husband, "Oh, they must need money." And she took her bangles off and gave them to the robbers. And that was the assumption by the brahmacharis.
All right. Ramanuja. Next group. Yes? What's that? Go ahead.
Hare Krishna. So, also, Samantaka jewel, kings thought that Lord Krishna stole the jewel,
Okay.
which was an assumption.
What else?
And Prabhuji also said about Daksha, so same one. And then also Guhaka, the Nishad king, he thought that Bharat is coming to kill Ram from Ramayana.
So, okay. I didn't hear the person's name.
Guhaka, the Nishad king,
The Nishad.
he thought that Bharat is going to kill Lord Ramchandra.
Okay, got it.
Yeah. What is this? And the last one is Parikshit Maharaj also assumed that the sage Samyak Rishi is not giving respect and he pretending.
Okay. By the way, what we'll do about the microphone situation, even though it was a little uncomfortable, I'll wear the head one if we could get that together. While we're doing that, the next group, by the way, round of applause for that group. Wonderful. Ladies, do you need a mic? Okay. Go ahead.
Yeah. So Hiranyakashipu assumed that he won't be killed because he had so many boons that he received.
Hiranyakashipu, good one. Is that
And
okay?
Bali Maharaj also assumed that
Does it
he's
look
only
funny?
giving 3 steps of land and he wouldn't lose much.
Right. It's a good one. Really good.
Mother Sita thought that Rama was in danger, while Lakshmana said it couldn't be Ram.
Uh-huh.
And then Gadadhar Pandit assumed that Pundarik Vidyanidhi was a materialist.
Wow. Really
And
good.
Sugriva assumed that his brother Vali was dead in the cave. And that's when he closed the cave and he came and became the king. And also when Vibhishana came to surrender to Lord Ram, nobody was ready to believe him. They
Aha.
thought he was a spy sent by Ravana.
Excellent. Wow, I think this group won. Did we miss anyone? We got every group? Oh, yes.
We had Shringi, the son of
Aha.
thought
Kali
that is-
Yuga was started by an assumption.
he he thought his father was insulted.
That's right. Don't mess around with assumptions. You might cause a new yuga.
Romarshan Sutta thought he doesn't have to get up because he's the head of the sacrifice.
Uh-huh. Good.
And Srivas Pandit, when Devanand Pandit saw that Srivas Pandit was being taken out of the Srimad Bhagavatam class, he assumed he can keep quiet and doesn't have to face any consequence.
Wonderful. I'd like to collect these lists at the end because you guys are fantastic. Those are great lists. I mean, I had a few. Whoops. But most of them that you mentioned, right? We make assumptions. Do we ever make assumptions based on birth, right? Based on association, based on dress, right? Right? If I had hair down to here and was wearing a tie-dye shirt with a peace sign and said, "Hey, Haribo Prabhu is peace, man," you might make some assumptions about me, right? If I was wearing a sari, you might make some assumptions about me. So we make assumptions about people a lot, and the perfect example was Vibhushana, right? They just figured, well, he's from a family of demons. It's got to be one of them. Assuming someone is supreme who isn't, right? That happened with the Yamadutas, right? And it actually happens a few times, right? With Narada and Brahma, similarly, right? And someone mentioned about Hiranyakashipu had a kind of do we have false assumptions about ourselves? So many, just look, right, yeah, we have so many, we could spend the rest of the day talking about those. But yeah, Hiranyakashipu basically said, I'm immortal, right, and what about ourselves, right? Do we think we're a certain age? Do we think we're from a certain place, right? Just like, is that Prabhu who picked me up in the car yesterday here? Oh yeah, yes. So I said, Prabhu, where are you from? He said, Hyderabad. And I lived in India for 21 years. So I said, Hyderabad or Secunderabad? Because I know the difference. And he said, I was like, yeah, Secunderabad, how did you know? He was very proud of being, no, I'm joking. But we relate to where we're from. We relate certainly to our gender. We have so many assumptions that we make about ourselves. And really, at the end of the day, dust to dust, ashes to ashes, those assumptions are just here today and gone tomorrow. Right? What's that verse in the Gita, the 2nd chapter? Nasato vidite bhavo. Right? Yeah, what's real and what's unreal is often just, you can define it by permanence. And our assumptions, a lot of our assumptions about ourselves are different upadhis, are different designations. They're here today but gone tomorrow. So we make a lot of assumptions. And somebody brought this up, right? The assumptions that we make that often can be offensive, or at least in this case seen as offensive. Right? When Chitraketu kind of laughed, and Parvati didn't take it very well, did she? Here's another one that someone gave this example, right? Parikshit Maharaj made certain assumptions about the rishi, and next thing you know, Kali Yuga is taking place, right? So assumptions are, here's one. When Vishwarup took sannyas, Sachimata thought that Advaitacharya had persuaded him to do so. Therefore, she accused Advaitacharya of this, which was an offense at his lotus feet. Later, Lord Chaitanya induced his mother to take the dust of Advaitacharya's lotus feet, and thus her Vaishnava aparad was nullified. Right, so assumptions can get us in a lot of trouble. The last one here, in the city, I think someone mentioned this, right? In the city, when Satyajit's younger brother Prasena did not return from the forest with the jewel, Satyajit became very upset. He did not know that his brother had been killed by a lion and that the lion had been killed by Jambavan. He thought instead that because Krishna wanted that jewel, which had not been delivered to him, Krishna might have therefore taken the jewel from Prasena by force and killed him. This idea grew into a rumor. Do any assumptions grow into rumors? Not in ISKCON, but elsewhere, yeah. Yeah. And Srila Prabhupada would talk about the 4 defects, right? And one of them was that we make mistakes, and another one is that we can easily be fall into illusion, right? So just like, what do you see? You're all devotees. You only see cows. Anything else? What's that? 2 faces. Yeah, the faces on the cow. Oh, good. And then also, you might even see this as like a vase. But the idea is that our eyes are imperfect. Right? Similarly with this, what do you see? Tree. These are real Paka brahmacharis. And a bird, yes. Anything but women. Right, but butterflies, yes. And also, right. So the idea is simple, right? That our eyes can deceive us, or at least we can see things in different ways. We can perceive the same thing and see it differently. Right? Here's a good one. Yeah. It's all a matter of perspective. So, think for the next 30 seconds. In these kind of situations, 30 seconds seems like an eternity. But for the next 30 seconds, think of a time when you made an incorrect assumption. Big or small, you probably made 10 already today. Isn't that amazing? That was only 30 seconds. Just turn to the person next to you and share what you thought, just in dyads or triads. Go ahead. Do it. I just disappeared for a second. Is that all right?
Slide
Okay.
along with you.
Okay.
So if you could stand, move only within.
Okay, got it. This side, right? Okay, let's hear a few of them. Yes, we need microphones.
Two things.
Two, my gosh.
Sometimes I always feel that
This group's overachievers. Yeah.
my husband doesn't care for me.
Really? We'll talk about that later. No.
And when someone doesn't smile at me or talk to me, then I assume that they're upset with me.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Happens a lot. Yeah, thank you. Very good. Others? Yes?
I thought that occupation that I was planning to take, that is, I can express best of my talents and abilities.
I didn't catch that.
I was thinking that if I take certain education.
Oh, if I take certain education,
and I will go to that university, so I will be able to express all my talents, and I will find myself.
Okay, very good. Then an education will do certain things. Yes, Prabhu.
Based on somebody's body language or the way they speak, we assume that they're either like very proud or showing off. But based on their
what makes you say that? Yes.
Based on actions, we can know that they're very sincere.
I mean, that's a good point. I think it comes up later, but oh wait, now which flip chart are we showing on this one or this one? Oh, we're not. Okay. There's that statistic. I don't know how they come up with these exact statistics, but the principle is good. That we're going to talk about this later, but any of you who are mathematicians, that does add up to 100, right? That when you're communicating emotions, you talked about body language, that only 7% of communication is what you say. And then 38% is how you say it. And then 55% is body language, right? So this has a lot of implications that you can consider. For example, how good is email at communicating emotions? Right, because you're only getting the words. I mean, I guess if you add some emojis, you get a little bit more, right? Something like that. But you're only getting the words, right? And then at least in a telephone conversation, you're also getting the tone of voice, right? And this is I know when Vaisheshika Prabhu introduced me, he said that my wife was the principal of the an ICSE school and a Gurukul in India, in Vrindavan, for many years. And when she would teach new teachers, she would do a training for them, and the ones that were teaching really young children, right? So if you go up to a young child, and if you say, "I love you," right? The child starts crying, right? Even though the words were, "I love you," right? The tone of voice, right? And if you go up to the same child and you say, "I really hate your guts." I bet your parents wish you were never born. They a small child, right? The idea, of course, not to say that to children, but the idea being that tone of voice has so much, right? But body language is a big deal. So sometimes in really important communications, you might consider doing it face to face. I mean, I use video conferencing, and I have my shirt and tie, and then my pajamas underneath you, because you can only see that part. But really, it's an important thing to consider, especially emails. So what are those autocorrect? How many ruined relationships have come out of autocorrect? Right, when it was autocorrected, and then Yeah, you're breaking up with me, I'm breaking up with you. And they didn't mean to say I'm breaking up with you, but anyway, stuff like that. Others, so thank you about the body language. Yes, behind you. Do you have the mic?
Since you mentioned 55% is the body language, and often the person who's speaking cannot judge his or her own body language. So maybe if you can touch a little later on.
We will. Post-dated check for you on that one. Yes. Yes, Prabhu. Assumptions. I assume you have one.
Sometimes we also assume when we distribute the Bhagavatam, we feel that, okay, now better to leave this place. This is not going to take. But while we are about to quit, she said, I'm going to take. So assumption doesn't make, we should not make assumptions rather than depend on Krishna's will.
Yeah, I used to distribute books for many years and used to try to remember, what's that verse? Not considering who's qualified and who's unqualified. Because I would see this, I used to distribute books in the airport, and I'd see these businessmen in my mind's telling me, oh, forget this guy, and then see somebody with a hippie, which in the 70s they existed, and here's a real sweet one. But often Krishna proved me totally wrong. So yes, thank you. Others? Yes, Prabhu?
Yeah, generally people comment that when you look from exterior very calm, people say, how are you taking so much pressure? But internally you're feeling the pressure, but people keep commenting, oh, how are you so calm?
Very good. Yes. So many, yes.
I thought the class will be at least 10 to 15 minutes late. Coming from Indian background, you typically assume that.
Yes, you thought it was IST, Indian stretchable time. Yes. Especially if you read that, Vraja Vihari lived in India for 21 years. Bagme. Any other assumptions about me that offensive? Yeah.
I thought this class will be very grave and too much philosophy will be discussed, but you made it very interesting.
But now there's no philosophy, nothing about Krishna. Now you're very happy. Okay, got it. Right. Okay, but you get the idea. Okay, one last one. Real juicy one. I assume you should turn the mic on. Yeah.
I assumed professors from top-notch universities and who are at top of the field, they really enjoy and believe the research in their own field, but actually that doesn't happen. They don't believe their own research, neither their...
You just busted my bubble. Thank you. So you get the idea. We make assumptions. I mean, you have to make them. You have to make them to live. You're assuming the car is going to stop at a stop sign when you're about to make a left turn. We make so many assumptions, but the idea is certain key ones or important ones, especially in terms of Vaishnava relationships or our service. Think about them. And we'll talk a little bit more about that science. I think we'll skip this for now, but we do make some assumptions in ISKCON, right? And maybe we'll get back to that. This is one of my favorite quotes from Mark Twain. Anyone here a worrier? Only me? Okay. So, I just like the idea that we worry about so many things and we assume the worst usually, and most of the time they never happen. Yeah. And that's that. Here's an interesting one. Only one of those two is a convicted felon. Right? And it's not the person you might assume is. You ever made this mistake? Go up to a heavy set woman and say, when are you due? Yeah, you don't want to do that. And this is I like this one because the example of Shringi and Parikshit Maharaj and all that, right? A false assumption and action, and it was scary. Kali Yuga began. Now, of course, Kali Yuga might have began anyway, but still, if we make assumptions and then based on that assumption make some actions, and if the assumption is wrong, we could be in trouble. Could make some serious mistakes. Yes, I hear Prabhu. Yes. Microphone. See, I'm already well trained by ISV.
So when we are in manager position, a false assumption with action, we find that the intersection is scary. But many times if we have an assumption and we do not take action, also creates certain issues downstream. So what do you recommend in certain situations like that?
Do you ever heard of Ronald Reagan? Yes. Yeah, he used to be president. He's from this state, actually. He had this nice saying, trust but verify. Right? Everyone familiar with that? So the idea is, and we're going to get to this in a minute, when we make assumptions, test them and see if they're true, basically. It's pretty simple in one sense. Especially important ones, if you're in a managerial position, things like that. You know, it's important to make like I said, we make assumptions all the time, but there's ways of testing them. The simple ones is your example, your second one, right? So this happens to me a lot at work. I'm the ombudsman for the Department of the Interior, so I deal with conflict resolution all the time. People come to me all the time with problems. So sometimes it's simple things. The employee is walking by, the supervisor is walking the other way, employee says hi, supervisor doesn't say anything, the employee can't sleep for 3 days. Right? That's kind of your example, yeah. So a simple thing would be the employee goes up to the supervisor and says, you know, when we walked by and I said hi and you didn't, was there something going on there? Am I in trouble? Or, you know, and oftentimes what happened in this case recently, the supervisor says, no, my mind was somewhere else. I don't even remember the incident. Meanwhile, the person hadn't slept all weekend because it happened on a Friday. You know, so test assumptions. Here we go. So let's go back to the red Mustang. Okay, so first we observe data from the world. Is there a pointer on this? Yeah. Okay. Good. That way I can keep. If I stay, you guys have to remind me. If I stay this side of the chair, they can see me on the telly or the computer. So first we observe data, basically kind of neutrally, like a video camera would. We just take in visual and of course all the 5 senses, all the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, right? But then we often select from data that we observe, just like, you know, they could have seen so many things, but what do they focus on? No, but what did they, in the example I gave, what did they, the car, yes, the car. And not only that, but did they add some meaning about the car? Right? You add some meaning to, a red Mustang has a different meaning than a blue Ford Focus. No offense to anyone driving a Ford Focus, by the way. And then they drew some conclusions, right? Hot shot from DC, right? You know, cheater, doesn't care about, you know, taxpayers' dollars. I don't know about beliefs, but they certainly took some action, or in this case, inaction. Right? How long do you think it takes us generally to, to go up that ladder? Yeah, seconds, right? If it was an Olympic sport, we would do really well. All right, yeah, it doesn't take long. So the idea, back now to your question, what's your name, Prabhu?
Damodar Vamsidhari Das.
Wow, that's a long name. I hope you don't have to sign a lot of official letters. Your arm will get tired. Okay, can I just call you Damodar Prabhu? So Damodar Prabhu, so the point here, that your question is right here, right? And so what happens is, this can become a vicious cycle, right? Right? Everyone that you meet from, I don't know, can I make a bad joke? I better not. Everyone that you meet from Gujarat eats too much sugar, right? Because, you know, you met people who have too much sugar, they have diabetes, and then you think the next time you meet a person and that happens, then by then you're convinced that everyone from you know, like that. But the point being that instead of this reinforcing it, we can also go back down here and say, what other assumptions can I make? Now, the mind, like we quoted that verse from the 6th chapter of the Gita, right? That the mind can be your vipur or your bandhur, right? And the mind tendency is, in a vacuum of information, is to have a negative inference, to make negative assumptions. That's the general tendency of the mind, okay? So, we can, part of self-realization, right, is to see ourselves different from our mind and to kind of like observe the mind, to kind of like be on a balcony and watching the nature of the mind as described in the 6th chapter, and also especially in Uddhava Gita and so many places, right? And choose to think, I wonder if I can make another assumption, right? You're just about to pull into, actually one thing my wife and I do, because I'm sure they're probably just as bad, if not worse here, but the drivers in Washington, D.C. are pretty bad. So when we see someone weaving in and out of the Beltway, which is the main highway in D.C., my wife and I have this little joke saying, must be driving his wife to the hospital, she's pregnant. Why not assume something good instead of that total jerk, right? Like that. So we can look at other. Does that answer your question, Damodar Prabhu? Okay, good. So it's it's a muscle to start developing, because assumptions often, because they're often negative, right, they often can lead to conflicts amongst people in general and even amongst devotees. That's, if you're wondering why we're talking about assumptions, that's, I find that it's one of the main causes of conflict, both within ISKCON and in the outside world. Right? Yes. Oh, by the way, just before Damodar speaks, I would like to keep this quite informal, so anytime you have questions, comments, it's not a lecture, it's not, just didactic to you. So please be like, Damodar is leading a good example here. Yad acharati shrestas. Yes, Prabhu.
Dandavats, Prabhu. So one thing which I would like probably by end of tomorrow is in my career as well as, while doing preaching is, we make certain assumptions with the right intent and spirits to serve Srila Prabhupada mission.
Right.
But the way most of the times things are very good. But sometimes, things don't go as we do. And there is a feeling of guilt. Why didn't I do it in a certain way that could have helped this? So not now, I'm sure you have a flow of thing, but I just want to park because that is related to the prior question. How do we actually come out of that? And because it hurts sometimes. I should have done it differently. I didn't do the seva right.
Okay, so how to deal with guilt. I have a lot of experience with that. I come from a Jewish family. So of course you don't know what that means. That's how it's like, but my mother made me feel guilty until I was like 50. So yes, Boo, I'll keep that in mind. Thank you. There's one, good intentions, bad results. Right. But it's true. It's true. That I try to weigh this in our Krishna conscious philosophy, right? Because there's this. There's also that quote, right? The path to hell is paved by good intentions. Yet at the same time, we know from Nectar of Devotion, Srila Prabhupada talks, and I always took solace in this passage where he talks about how it's not so much that Krishna doesn't need our service, but what he's really looking after is our service attitude. So obviously, good intentions are essential, or they're necessary, but they may not be sufficient. We may sometimes have to also be able to communicate our good intentions, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So there's the Ronald Reagan quote for you, Damodar. And the idea behind thinking about assumptions does have a lot to do with the mind, right? And that it seems that it's really hard to, as hard as it is to control the mind, part of it is to control our assumptions. They're just like second nature, right? right? I mean, let's face it. Most of us in this room are from India, right? So we could have a lot of fun right now, right? Talking about what are the assumptions about Bengalis, what are the assumptions about Gujaratis, what are the assumptions about people from Andhra, right? And everyone has their jokes about everyone, you know. So Krishna says it's really hard, but he didn't let Arjuna off the hook. Arjuna was kind of saying, well, I got this one right. Okay, Krishna, it's so hard, harder than, you know, controlling the wind. And he probably would have hoping that Krishna would say, yeah, you're right, you know, no problem. But Krishna doesn't let him off the hook, right, at all. He says it's possible, right, by practice and detachment. Okay. I thought it was going to be a comment.
I was just thinking about when you brought up in our movement, it could work the other way as well, the assuming someone is can take good care of your kid.
Yes.
Assuming that someone is very pure and following blindly.
Yes. There's a flip side to that. That's right. Matter of fact, I have a slide later. I think let me see if it just, there it is. And I use this at work also. And I found it harder to use this slide at work in the last 2 months with all the things about, I did a lot with sexual harassment and sexual assault at work, and all that coming to light. And thinking that maybe Ronald Reagan's statement about trust but verify. Or I have a very close friend of mine, one of my closest friends. Maybe some of you know him. His name is Kadamba Swami. And we became friends because he was my temple president for probably about 15 years in Vrindavan. And anyway, we had a good relationship. And so he would say, he said, Braj, I'm Dutch. So love and trust, he said, I love everybody. Trust? So it's a tricky thing, right? The idea, of course, is that trust the right people and have a healthy distrust of the wrong people. And being able to discriminate between those two is a challenge, yes. But with things like the care of our children and our bank account, our ATM password or whatever, you know, there's certain things that you want to be a little more careful about. But yes, any thoughts on this? Because it's a sensitive thing. Because at the same time, Krishna consciousness runs by trust. We're going to hand out some quotes from Srila Prabhupada a little later. And when you think about it, everyone surrendered to Srila Prabhupada. You know, we talk about love and things like that, but we don't so much mention this word. Devotees implicitly trusted him. And still to this day, you see the senior devotees in the room giving their entire life. And once, on one level, it's all based on that one thing. They trust Srila Prabhupada implicitly.
When we say assume positive intention, maybe it's hard to do every single time, especially with a person who's known to take advantage of others. So
Yeah.
Maybe you can shed more light on, is
I
there
don't know
a
if I can shed
caveat?
more light on it, but assuming good intentions is okay, but still verify. Vaisheshu, you want to say something? No, I was handing you the mic. Anyway, it's a sensitive issue, but I think it's so important. Krishna consciousness runs on love and trust. It really does. Right? So we just have to use our intelligence. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what else. Anyone? Vaisheshu, would like to comment on this?
Well, just brainstorming in the way in which they're kind of a dual way of looking at people given in the Shastra. This is mentioned by the Acharyas. If someone's of bad character, it doesn't mean that you completely disparage them within your mind. You appreciate them, but then the Acharyas say you don't have to associate with them. Mm-hmm. You keep them at a distance. And I was also thinking that the way Krishna describes in the Bhagavad Gita, the way we should treat people if they have bad characters, apichet sutaracharo, etc., is basically what he's saying there, and then the next verse is you should trust the process. Because if somebody is in the process with the right intention, then even if they're really of bad character, if they've done something really bad, then they'll be rectified later, and you have to consider them like that because they're in the process.
Yes. And let's, I won't mention any names, but you could say, you can analyze things in different ways, right? But you could say that this yatra is so successful because the leadership is so trustworthy. And then you all experience that trust, and you surrender to Krishna because of that. So it's such an important thing. And I liked what you're saying. I mean, I didn't know if I should mention too much about my history, but between my wife and I, we've been initiated 6 times. So, well, we put a lot of bananas aren't too expensive, so we put a lot of bananas in the fire. But some people say I'm bananas, but I never, even so I was initiated by, because I was a bhakta when Srila Prabhupada left this world. But I never felt, personally, when people ask me about this, I always felt even to this day, very positive about those people who initiated me and later had some difficulties, that they took me to a certain place and then kind of handed me off. And at the same time, Krishna and Srila Prabhupada were taking care of me. So I didn't lose that trust, and didn't even have bad feelings about those other people, and one of them I have a very good relationship with today. So I like your point. I mean, in general, devotees have good intentions. In general, they may be weak and have some struggles, but my experience is that generally devotees have good intentions. That doesn't mean, again, you put a person who has no idea about childcare in charge of your 2-year-old. We do things intelligently. Okay, shall we move on? Yes, yes.
Is there a difference between assumption and judgment? Are they the same, or?
I think they're very similar. Judgment and, yeah. So we're meant to be not, in certain situations, like in the Gita, there's a lot about being, for example, in the 2nd chapter, verses in the 50s, how does he walk, how does he talk, and in many places there, or seeing equally a pebble, gold, etc., like that. So there is a lot about equanimity of mind in the Bhagavad Gita. And so a person who's applying equanimity of mind to assumptions, one might observe the mind making assumptions and see, is this pratikul, is this anukul, is this favorable to my devotional service, making this assumption, is it pratikul, is there another explanation, and go through that kind of mental exercise. Is that all right? Okay, so here's the point. Question assumptions or conclusions and seek contrary data. That doesn't mean every assumption. I'm not trying to make us walk out of here being totally mental, but just, key things, especially in terms of relationships. And especially if you think so-and-so did something to you on purpose. They might have done something, they might not have done it on purpose. Right? The person who, yes, Ru.
So this Kartik month, I was not shaving my beard. So one time I was there at the end of the Kartik in my office cube, and one of my friends stopped by me, and he was looking at surprising because he was on vacation. He came.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I see you. When did you take Islam? I said,
yes. Yes.
He was surprising, giving me look and wait a minute, didn't give to respond back. Sometimes people assume to conclude.
Yes, actually, I have another beard assumption. So my son is 26, almost 27, and he was born and raised in Vrindavan actually, his whole life until he was 18, and so he just graduated from graduate school a couple of weeks ago, and he has a beard, and he does a lot of ISKCON stuff. Maybe some of you have heard of the TSI, the Sangha Initiative. He and Srila Prabhu's daughter started that, and it's a program for devotees 16 to 30, and he's organizing the upcoming temple presidents meeting. So I was always trying to get him to kind of shave the beard, because I said in ISKCON people are going to think, you're one of those Guru Cooley, whatever. I had this whole thing about my concern about his impression, and I said, why not just get rid of it? It's just, but he has a reason, which is, I had made assumptions that he just liked to look cool. He said, Pitta, I'm applying for jobs right now, and I tell you, when I shave, I look like I'm 14 years old. He has a baby face, so so he grew his beard to get, for a totally different reason than some other things. So I had made some assumptions about him. We had this discussion. Okay, assume good intentions. So this is something you're probably familiar with. Maybe it's a very good model that applies to a lot of things in life, that often we're in the beginning unconscious that we're incompetent. We don't even, like, for example, we might not even ever even thought about assumptions before an hour ago, right? I assume that anyway. And then we become conscious that we're incompetent. God, I make a lot of assumptions, and geez, I don't really test them at all, right? Then the next stage is, okay, so now I should test some of them. I become consciously competent. And then eventually you become so good at something that you become unconsciously competent, right? Like driving a car might be like that, At first, every right-hand turn was like, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Right? But then or I remember driving in Ireland, and at first it was, okay, now, because it's on the other side of the road, and like in India. I don't drive in India. I'm smarter than that. So that's about assumptions. So what thoughts, concerns? Anyone? Damodar, you've already asked, so we'll ask somebody. Yes? Microphone?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. I was just thinking about the quote that you put up in the beginning of the class. We cannot live with assumptions and without assumptions.
Right.
But does that mean assumptions is a bigger umbrella encompassing fear, expectations, like Mataji said, judgment?
Yeah, it does.
Lack of self-awareness, everything. So it's born out of all negative attributes then?
Oh, no, not necessarily. Born of negative attributes. No, a lot of them are based on our experience, and lots of time. I would guess, I don't know, over 50% of our assumptions are right. So
that confirms that we cannot live
all the
without
time,
them as well.
right? Yeah. I mean, like Prabhupada, I think it's fair to say he assumed that because I'm quite familiar with the construction in Vrindavan, not because I was there when it was first being constructed, ISKCON Vrindavan, but the fallout from buildings falling apart now. And Srila Prabhupada, I think, rightly assumed that the construction people were cheating the Western devotees who were in charge of the construction. He was right. Yeah, the latter half of the Gurukul building is basically falling apart because they mixed Jamuna sand with the cement, which obviously is a lot cheaper, right? So Prabhupada made some assumptions about those merchants, which was correct, like that. And he would joke about some of his assumptions. Remember that time he was giving a press conference, darshan, in the airport, and he said something about hippies, and the reporter said, "Could you define hippie?" And he probably "You know better than me," he said, right? And he was, making some assumptions about the cleanliness of hippies and things like that.
So,
yes.
So Prabhuji, can you again kind of conclude, like overview, like how we should do an assumption? And
well, we do them without how or not. You mean how should we view them? Okay, so the idea is that they can cause conflicts. Okay, that's how it's connected to this presentation on conflicts, right? That devotee who cut in front of us to take the last parking space outside, right? Then we make some assumptions about them, right? So, especially in terms of Vaishnava aparad, we saw how assumptions, right, can cause aparad. So we think, is there an alternative? Maybe he has an elderly mother who really, and the handicap spot was already taken, right? So, so we can think of alternative explanations that may be just as valid or even more valid than the assumption that we're making.
So,
and then we can test them, as we were talking with Damodar. We could test them and say, when the devotee gets out of the car, we could say, Prabhu, Hare Krishna, I was just about to take that spot. Did you see my indicator was on? And and see what the person. Oh, geez, I didn't even notice. I'm sorry. You want? I'll be happy to move. Right? Instead of keeping it in ourselves, and we see that person at prasadam, and we're distributing prasadam. We make sure they don't get one piece of paneer, right? Right? And seriously, a little thing like that can, so what we're trying to also do is nip Vaishnava aparad in the bud. Stop it before it takes root. Because the only really fear that we have in this world, we don't care about, nuclear war with North Korea, or whatever. Our biggest fear is offending Vaishnavas. Because we know that that's the one thing that blocks our devotional progress more than anything else. So in a Vaishnava community, again, outside of the idea of turning over our children to unqualified people and things of that nature, trying to assume good intentions and clarifying things when there may be some question about that we may be questioning a person's intention.
Prabhuji, I had another question. So it seems like women, they think differently in assumptions and men think differently in assumptions. Like, do you have any comment on that? Like, what?
I'm not touching that with it.
Prabhuji, a question quick.
I think one of the ladies had a question.
So, Prabhu, just to summarize, you're saying that whenever there is an assumption, the workflow that I'm thinking is, first you give that person the benefit of doubt, or the other way is, if it's bothering you, you go and clarify it with that person,
Mm-hmm.
and then based on what that person responds, then you take an action, either to correct yourself or to resolve the situation. Or the third, or the extension of that is probably have someone resolve the conflict for you.
Yeah, okay, that's a whole, we'll get into that later, yes. Yeah. But, it is tricky with the benefit of the doubt thing, I mean, I was just, came to my mind Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur's statement that there's only two classification of people in this world. What are they? Yeah, the cheaters and the cheated. So, there are people, we can't walk around this world totally naive, but at the same time we can clarify things, and especially amongst devotees. Is that all right? And anyway, thank you for that. It was a good summary. Are you a teacher or something? No. But it's what she just did, we're going to talk about it a little later, but it's really important in communications. If you're having a discussion with someone, and one way to really, first of all, make sure the understanding is right, and also to really develop the relationship, is you summarize. You say, now, we've just had this talk for a half hour. Let me make sure I got everything right. And people, first of all, they feel so amazed that someone listened to them. And then if you did get something wrong, they'll be happy to clarify it. It really helps a lot. So summarizing is a great communication tool. And it's an easy thing to do. You don't need to go to college for that. It's easy to summarize. Yes, Prabhu?
Prabhuji, in our everyday life, right? So our interactions is with the external world, a lot of assumptions, and with our mind, we continuously struggling. So proportion-wise, I guess, how does our whole process works, like in terms of proportion with external and also with the mind, and how do we actively engage in that?
Well, I really liked when you were talking, the thing that really came to my mind is the biggest maha assumption is that our mind is our friend. That's a huge assumption. And right, because our mind tells us to do something. Right, mind tells us to do something. We follow the dictates of our minds so easily. And it's such a, we should definitely test that assumption. We should definitely test that assumption. Because it can be, Krishna says it can be your bandhur, but it can certainly be your vipur. And we see that, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta again, right? Beating the head or neglecting. There's so many different ways we hear about controlling the mind. But that's a big assumption, isn't it? That's like a maha assumption. Either that my mind's my friend, or perhaps even more, I am my mind. I am my emotions. I am my thoughts. Right? Those are big issues. I'm exhausted just thinking about it. Just behind you, can you pass the mic to the Prabhu behind you?
So like one of the basic problems that we face is that, like when we hear, for example, we hear this
when you hear what?
When we heard this lecture and we think about, okay, we have to do certain things.
Yes.
And after 1 week, we go back to our old normal way.
Yes.
How do we stop?
Right.
That?
Don't do it. That is why, you see, I could have done assumptions in 10 minutes, okay, and given you like this real overview of so many different things. So I chose not to do that for that very reason. What's your name, Prabhu? Hari Sankirtan? Good name. For that very reason, that my experience is that when we focus on a few things, we start talking about them, right? And next week at the Sunday feast, we're saying, somebody, I think, Prabhu, that's kind of an assumption, isn't it? Right? And it just becomes part, if something becomes part of our, of course we don't want, Hare Krishna is our main language, but when something becomes part of our discussion, then it sticks longer, or it can be a kind of a permanent thing. So that's why I just chose a few topics and dive more deeply in them, because and I have seen in yatras, both in outside work and also in ISKCON, that, for example, that's why I chose assumptions. I found that I've gone back to like a temple a year later, and they're still talking about assumptions, because they just it kind of clicked, and people kept referring to it in their discussions with other devotees. So you're right. The most frustrating thing for a trainer in the outside world, or even I guess in ISKCON, is everyone, they laugh at your jokes, and this and that, and then 2 weeks later it's like, Vraja Vihari, who's that guy? What did he come here for? Right. So the idea is to talk about a few things and go more deeply in them. So I would encourage you, as part of your Krishna conscious discussions, right, to think about assumptions. That's why and so I chose these, even though it seems a little haphazard. There's actually a sequence to what we did, and the idea. I always think it's very important in any presentation like this to see that it's not just some thing that I got out of a book 5 years ago that was written about conflict resolution, but that we saw all the different examples in the Shastra of assumptions. It's not something just that was created in the last 20 years, right? Kali Yuga was started because of it, and so many of our stories, and I'm sure if we spent another 10 minutes, we probably would have come up with at least 10 more assumptions that we see in the Shastra, or if we looked at Srila Prabhupada's life or his dealings with his disciples, we could come up with a lot more. Is that all right? So I assume you're going to talk a lot about assumptions in relationship to Krishna consciousness. Just like in the first canto of the Bhagavatam, I think it's around mainly chapter 16-ish, right? Which many times Srila Prabhupada talks about how, why do devotees care about politics? Right? But if it's politics and related to Krishna consciousness, right, it's because the whole thing about Parikshit Maharaj and Kali Yuga and all that, is going on there. And Srila Prabhupada many times in those purports is saying, well, if something is connected with Krishna consciousness, politics then becomes very interesting to talk about. So assumptions in and of themselves, who cares, right? But if we're talking about them in terms of bettering our devotional life. TK? Anyone else besides, anyone who hasn't asked, made a question or comment? Yes.
So probably what I understand, and I actually have also learning that
She's summarizing, very good.
We've been living our life on assumptions. For example, if this morning I walk into the kitchen and I'm hoping the electricity is already there to turn on the burner, but apparently it's not.
Okay.
Same thing with the blender. Let's say blade is there, but apparently it's not, right? So I'm living the life of basically build-up assumptions over the years. So that has been my pattern. When the other side, I'm practicing, I want to see the people. If I want to see someone as you as a nice person, then I need to think you as a nice person. And so basically what I'm trying to say is, I shouldn't see what I want you to see. I would like to see that what I would like you to see as. So basically, let me put it this right way. So it's not like I should see as you who are, but what I would like you to see as. So and that will help me to see the person's good intentions, good judgment, and it clears out the conflicts and underlying issues, and you don't get carried away and waste your life in that.
Yes.
So I'm kind of thinking I'm probably living the contradictory life. Everything I'm going with the assumption that everything is going to go on. But then on the other hand, I'm not seeing that, okay, electricity will be already there, the blender would be already there. So in real life, you think that, okay, you're going to be this. I'm verifying the trust here that it's going to be there, but I'm living also at the same time opposite. So
well, that's why an important part of devotional practices is practicing gratitude, right? And because we can, I guess you could say taking for granted is a little bit connected with assumptions. I guess you could see that connection, right? Just assume everything will be there and everything will be fine. So we have, of course, in Washington, we have the Queen of Gratitude. We have Rukmini Devi Dasi there, who just gives these great talks on gratitude, and it's such an important thing, right? To be grateful for the association of devotees, to be grateful for to everything that Krishna has given us, and to not just take things for granted. I was also thinking, as you were talking about assumptions, Krishna is talking about assumptions in one sense when he says janma mrityu jaravyadhi dukkha doshanu darshanam, right? When he says that a wise part of knowledge is to see the ills of disease, especially disease, old age, and death. Because I know I was just ill, and I was thinking about this, that I'm generally quite healthy, right? So for the last 59 years, I just kind of figured, well, I assume it's always going to be like this. I'm always going to be healthy. And Krishna's saying, don't make that assumption. You're going to get old, right? As much as you totally only experience being alive in this body, that assumption's gone. You're going to die. And even if you've been really healthy, that assumption that you're just going to always be healthy, he says, if Krishna was from Brooklyn, he would say, forget about it. Right? So in that sense, Krishna is trying to also get us to start questioning our assumptions about basic things when he says birth, death, disease, and old age. Another thing that came to my mind was, and this is a whole, gosh, you bring my wife here sometime about parenting, but just the idea about, this idea of self-fulfilling prophecies, right? And if you treat a person as if they were something, they trust you and love you, they try to become that, right? Just like Srila Prabhupada. I mean, gosh, what did he do, right? He's that famous interview, I think, with Thomas Hopkins, was it? And he was talking about Ram Roy, and Prabhupada told him to just start a magazine. And he said the kid probably didn't know anything about magazines, maybe he read one once. but probably just saw that spark and fanned it. And so having that kind of assuming that, let's say, when our children can choose to be really good devotees, can choose to do the right thing, and having that kind of assumption, developing that assumption within them, often gives them the strength of character to make the right choices when we're not around, and they have choices to make.
Just continuing that thought, there's a commentary in 11th canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam by Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur, where he names the least advanced people, or the lowest, the demoniac kind of people, and then the highest type of devotee. And without all the details of the midway ranges, he says that the lowest person finds fault even when there is none. And that the most advanced devotee finds good qualities even when there aren't any.
Very good. Very good. So on that note, why don't it's always good to end. Two things about training: end on a high note and stop a little early. Those are always, people are very happy. So how long is our break for? Till 10:20? Okay, so let's take a break until 10:20, and I won't even tell you what we're going to talk about next.